thank you so much, Kevin, for joining me today. Very excited to chat about your journey, Ampaire's journey, sort of mission and vision of what it's building, what it has built so far. A lot of interesting things happening in aerospace and in, design and just transfer of energy, not only for our homes and our automobiles, but, also flights, airplane. Like, how do we get this sector that is more and more being used to ship around the world, fly people around? Like, it's such a massive, I think, industry that we don't think about electrifying quite as much because we're like, how is it even possible? Really, really happy to dive in. But before we do talk about Ampaire, talk a little bit about your journey, Kevin, like what your career arc was like. What was your steps to get toward co-founding Ampaire and being the CEO?
Yeah, well, Grant, thanks for having me. And you bring up some good points about this, what the industry needs and kind of what the world needs at this point in time. So about my journey, as a kid, I grew up in Utah in a ski town just outside of Salt Lake. And, my core, I fell in love with looking up at the starry nights and going on hikes and fresh air and blue skies, and really found myself at home in nature. It's still very much part of who I am. And I think as a kid, when I found myself out there, I also this idea of exploring, this idea of how do we access the stars above, how do we get there? What are these things flying overhead? How do you become an astronaut? Questions that I think a lot of kids ask themselves, which of course led to, the model rockets and all that kind of stuff. And this deep fascination with how we live in the world around us and how what we build can affect it and how we can travel within it. And ultimately led me to getting my mechanical engineering degree from Caltech. So really rigorous foundational education where I'd always like to think I pulled two things out of my 4 years there. Number one is a great first principles foundation of knowledge and approach to hard problems. The second is an immense amount of humility. The Caltech is full of really bright people, all of them that seemed so much smarter than I ever was. And what I loved is that every person I would come across was like expert in something, and maybe it was mainstream, maybe it was obscure. And if I wasn't talking to the world leading expert in whatever I was interested in at that moment, they probably knew who that person was. So you're always like 1 or 2 degrees out from world renowned, which was really unique for me, right? Coming from a place in Utah where that wasn't necessarily the case. Having in my education, kind of these formative years, be in a place where people dreamed of changes that happened over the course of half centuries, where Nobel Prize winners were literally walking the sidewalks. I mean, I sat down for meals and had conversations with Stephen Hawking, like these kinds of experiences, the kind of experiences that not only teach you, the technical knowledge that you might gain in school, but really teach you that you can have a place in the world and do something meaningful with that place. With a lot of gratitude, I received some financial aid in college to help me pay for school. And I sat down for lunch one time with this really generous guy who had funded my freshman year. And I asked him, I was like, you don't know me. I don't know you. Why are you putting this money up to help a kid go to school? And, a little bit of a pessimist he was, he shared with me, he's like, you know what, Kevin, this is like 2005 timeframe. He's like, Kevin, I think that humanity has less than 50 years left before we annihilate ourselves or destroy the planet or something. And I'm getting old and there's nothing I can do about it. Maybe if I help some smart chumps like you actually, get into the right spots, maybe you can do something about it. And little interactions like that, people that was pretty weighty for like an 18-year-old. Little experiences and interactions like that have always pressed me to keep my vision bigger than just the detail of, what am I doing today, but think about the big picture of what kind of impact, what kind of global, even solar system, universal scale impact is possible. And to make sure that we're not and specifically for me, that I'm not squandering my time, this precious little time that we have here on Earth. So that led me to, a good engineering degree, research in robotics at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which was
Wow.
like just fascinating. And like space robots is a pretty cool thing to work on. And yeah, and I got really lucky, had some good mentors, and ended up after graduation, when a lot of kids are trying to decide should go and stay in academia, go get a PhD in robotics or something. I ended up taking a cool job in aerospace. Always loved things that flew. Always loved airplanes. Always loved space. And I got into, again, pretty lucky. I got into probably the coolest part of Northrop Grumman, which was effectively their skunk works doing stealth technology research and development. So this is, and I remember one of the senior leaders there, I was asking him, like, how do I describe to my family what we do here? Because so much of it was secret. We couldn't say the details. He was like, he quoted this sci-fi author. It's a beautiful quote that I love. That's Arthur C. Clarke said, this is one of his laws of technology, that any technology that's sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. Indistinguishable from magic. And that's what we're doing is and what is magic in practice? It's sleight of hands, sparks, smoke, and mirrors, and a lot of skill. So there's a way to implement magic in the real world. But this idea that I could be working on technology that's just so far out there. So this was great, and it was an amazing place to start a career, right? Because as a smart engineer, I got a ton of responsibility to be creative, to start leading research and development projects, to kind of build up some teams, to motivate, to understand all the stakeholders and the funding and schedules and reporting and all of the factors that reality brings into engineering projects that are so much beyond, again, just the cogs in a gear. And it gave me this deep appreciation for the full life cycle process. Of systems, of teams, of organizations, of products, and laid a pretty amazing foundation in those early years. After I realized that stealth technology, as magical as it was super niche and not the place I wanted to spend my whole life. And so I moved into a different portion of Northrop Grumman to work on space systems, so like satellites. We worked on a weather observing satellite, so microwave sounder that looks down on the layers of the atmosphere, and it helps us understand kind of what's going on in the atmosphere all the time. The big kind of rallying cry and mission for that was about increasing the level of confidence that we have when projecting hurricanes, so that instead of only having a confidence track a few days, or a day or two out, you're now getting 3 to 5 days, maybe more horizon on knowing where things go. So it's like using technology, aerospace technology, in order to impact the world in a positive way. And but what I'll say is, after 7 years of working in a big company, even though I was getting, a lot of responsibility and I was having a great time and good people, meaningful work, there was still something kind of missing for me. Something I felt that I needed to do something bigger. Maybe it was the echoes of that lunch with the gentleman who funded my freshman year, reminding me that I really did need to shoot for the moon. I needed to do something bigger with my time, and I didn't know what that was. I felt a little lost, quite a bit lost. And like anybody who's a little way into their career feeling lost, I decided I was going to go to business school, and so that was like, okay, I need a holding pattern of some sort. But this is 2015. When I decided that, okay, I'm going to go this path, it was like the world was conspiring for me to do something different, something bigger. It was each conversation I had was driving me in this kind of entrepreneurial direction, though I didn't really know what would come of it.
Sure.
I remember an event that I went to with this. It was back at Caltech. It was a lifetime achievement award, and one of my mentors, who I was there with, was the first time I met him. His name's Dan Golden, and Dan used to run NASA. He's the reason we had the space station. He has a huge amount of vision. He truly is visionary for aerospace and technology. And I remember my conversation with him where he lit up when he was talking about the companies that he was building and this entrepreneurial stuff. And that was news to me. And then I remember when I was visiting some business schools out in Boston, I coincided with an aerospace entrepreneurship panel where I heard about all these innovative things happening. And again, I'm like, okay, well, I'm doing the business school thing. And then I was like 2 rows in the flight back to LA, sat next to the VP of special projects from one of these companies who had given that talk on that panel. And I'm sitting chatting with him about like, hey, I'm trying to figure out my life and what am I going to do? And he shared with me, he's like, look, if you have an idea, and if it's the right time for that idea, then do it now, because 2 years from now, it won't be the right idea. But if you don't know what company you want to start, then, going to a good business school is a great way to do it. And I was like, thank goodness I don't have a good idea. I know what I'm going to do. And then no joke, less than 2 weeks later, one of my old colleagues, this brilliant engineer out of Stanford, like genius level engineer, his name's Corey. Corey calls me up and he's like, Kevin, I got an idea. And he sits me down at lunch and he says,
Love those calls.
I know. Man, they're life-changing calls.
When really smart people say, I have an idea,
yeah,
it's cool.
Yeah.
It's always a good moment.
And so he sat me down and he's like, Kevin, I want us to change aviation. I want to build a vertical takeoff and landing, supersonic, fully electric jet. And I want you to help to build this company with me. I mean, just like, that is crazy. That is huge. That is audacious and ambitious. That is the biggest rock you could possibly move, right? And I was like, well, that sounds impossible. But knowing Corey, it was like, there's something incredible here. And so he was patient with me. And as I unpacked that statement, vertical takeoff and landing, supersonic, fully electric jets, we uncovered some really core truths about the trends that we were anticipating in aviation. Again, this is 2015, right? This is 8 years ago. And it was that electrification technology, the EV technology that, Tesla Roadsters I'll have to get my dates straight, but call it the Model S might have been rolling out at that time. Prius is driving around everywhere, probably changing lanes too slowly. Like you've got EVs on the ground and they're starting to be there. And this question of like, what does it mean in aviation? And as we unpack this, it was like, well, you can do this vertical takeoff and landing thing that's been so hard in the future. Fly to and from anywhere you wanted to go. You could do this efficient propulsion, airframe integration, new novel concepts for vehicles that were never possible, like wild opportunity. But then also, you're able to decrease the carbon impact of aviation, decrease the direct pollution from aviation, eliminate things like leaded fuels. Aviation still burns leaded fuel for general aviation, smaller airplanes. You got the particulate matter and the NOx and all these other things. You got the noise burden. And then you have the economics of aviation that when you switch over to an electrified solution, just get turned upside down and undo all of these trends of an atrophying industry that's losing service to communities all over the world. As you put in new technology, you now are able to make it more economical to fly these routes. You provide a new service, more frequent service to communities that have lost it recently or never had it before. And then so like all of these pieces started to, like as you're peeling the layers of the vision into the pragmatic and compelling impact of the opportunity, like that has, really turned into the story of these last 8 years as we founded in 2016 and then have been building Ampaire on this mission to decarbonize aviation, increase accessibility, and really build what I think is going to drive the next 100 years of flight.
So when somebody now asks you, and you can divulge what you're working on, which is awesome, right? It's like, how do you explain Ampaire to people, right, who are not maybe in the weeds, in the sector? You're just sort of, out and about at sort of an event or like a dinner party or something, and somebody asks you what Ampaire is. Like, how do you give them how do you condense it down into a conversation piece where people can just everyday people can sort of understand.
Let's say you walk up to me at a bar and you say, "Hey, tell me about Ampaire." I'm going to say, "Have you ever heard of a Toyota Prius?"
Yes.
We make Toyota Prius-like systems, hybrid electrics, but for airplanes. These systems cut fuel burn by 50 to 70%, better for the environment, it's better economics, and it's going to touch a whole lot of lives in a lot of positive ways.
When we talk about like the past, let's say 8 years or so, you had mentioned, right? Like what have been sort of the advancements just in that, let's say almost nearly a decade, right? Like is Ampaire creating new planes? Are they putting technology into older planes and then basically reviving their sort of life and lifespan into old planes? Like where are we at in the Ampaire lifespan of what it's working on the last sort of 8 years and what is graduated maybe to work on now?
Totally. Man, a lot happens in 8 years. It's phenomenal. I mean, the world and our company has changed so much. When we started, we were just those crazy punk kids who wanted to start an airplane company, right? Like it was like the people called us crazy, like it was insane. I remember everyone I talked to was like, "Are you sure you want to be doing this?" When you have deep conviction around something and everyone else is calling you crazy, that's maybe when you're onto something.
Yep. Exactly.
And in this case, so 8 years ago, we started with that vision of vertical takeoff and landing, supersonic, fully electric jets.
When you say vertical takeoff and landing, that means the plane doesn't need sort of a typical runway. It sort of just hovers off the ground, let's say, like a Back to the Future hoverboard, right? It just sits there, goes up, and then it can sort of take off. Almost the runway is done in air rather than on the ground.
That's right. It's like a helicopter, right? You take off in that way. And the reality is that around the time and over the last, better part of a decade, a lot of other companies have popped up trying to do new designed planes to do exactly this. There's some really, in the industry, well-known ones who are out there and making pretty good progress on that style of a plane. Specific to our strategy at Ampaire, though, we realized that when we started, there was no supply chain, there were no incumbents, there were no batteries made for aviation, there were no motors or inverters that were specific to aviation. We realized that what we really needed to do was we needed to focus on the heart of the problem, and rather than starting by building a new airplane, what we really needed to do was to build the foundation of technology that could fit into any airplane and that ultimately would enable all airplanes. And so you do that not by designing one unique clean sheet, is what I would call it, like a design from scratch airplane, which is an immense undertaking and serves only one portion of a market. Instead, it's like a picks and shovels approach. We're building the propulsion systems initially and integrating them into planes, both those planes that already are flying, already are in operation with fleets around the world. But then those same systems that we're building fit nicely into the new airplanes that are getting designed. We've got customers who do vertical takeoff and landing. We've got customers who are doing higher speed conventional planes and also your kind of short haul cargo style turboprops. And so what we've done over the years, I mean, just some current stats. So we went from nothing but a dream to we now have the world's largest fleet of hybrid electric planes. We have flown that fleet all around the world, deploying in pilot projects with airlines. We've flown over 25,000 miles so far. We deployed an island hopped in Hawaii. We were out in the Orkney Islands, out in Scotland. We flew across England. We've cross-countryed out across the United States in order to be featured at the Oshkosh Air Show. Last summer, we did this amazing trek up through the remote tundra of Canada and up into Alaska. It was 3,400 miles of flights to get from Southern California up there, like living in the harsh realities of the world and deploying these new technologies in places that people probably never thought they could go, and showing that a lot of the misconceptions that people would normally come in with around electric vehicles in aviation, like the batteries are really, really heavy, so like you can't carry anybody or you can't fly very far.
Right.
In December of 2023, we flew a mission with one of our hybrid planes where we flew for 12 hours straight.
Wow.
That was 1,400 miles traveled in a single hop. If that's not sufficient range, I really don't know what is, because nobody wants to stay in a small plane for that long. And so the reality is, like, it is upon us to both build the technology, but then also educate the world about what is real, what is not, what they can expect, when they can expect it, and ultimately to deliver on all these promises for a sustainable future for aviation.
You mentioned some of the sort of statistics. The Ampaire technology can lower fuel by 90%, maintenance by 50%, noise by 60%. We're sort of in this, the infancy, let's say, of electrifying aerospace in a way, right? We're still kind of figuring out a bunch of stuff, but like you said, the last 10 years, I mean, a miracle of things have happened, right? I guess what are the issues and hurdles now that Ampaire is trying to figure out? Like, it seems like you have the foundation sort of built. You have sort of case studies in the air. You're flying 12 hours. You have a lot of the foundational stuff figured out, it sounds like. What are, I guess, the struggles and hurdles now that you face?
We've made a lot of good strategic decisions to reduce the risk on a lot of the factors. For example, some of the ones you mentioned. So I'll start with the things that could have been hard problems for us, but that we've resolved. And then I'll talk a bit about kind of the ones that remain in front of us. So by choosing to go hybrid electric, again, kind of like a Toyota Prius, it means that we have a relatively small battery. We're able to maintain all of the useful payload of the aircraft. We're able to maintain all of the range of the aircraft. So where battery weight was an immense challenge and is for fully electric aviation, for hybrid electric, current technology is sufficient. Also, when we do these deployments and we're flying around the world, one of the big bottlenecks for even still ground electric vehicles is electric vehicle chargers. I flew into Chicago last summer. I was visiting a company out there, and I rented an electric vehicle. And Chicago has plenty of chargers, no issues. But this company was outside of Chicago by just under 100 miles. And when I drove out to this more rural area, there wasn't a charger. There wasn't a charger within 45 minutes of where I was.
Right.
Even today. And so the reality is that though many of us who live in bigger cities may be taking for granted EV charging infrastructure, most of the world has none. And when you actually look at even the grid infrastructure to support those EV chargers, it still needs to be improved and built up, and the energy availability at those locations. And so when you look at electrifying aviation, the lack of charging infrastructure at airports is a huge bottleneck and going to hold back an industry that relies upon them. Now, we strategically chose to go with a Prius-like hybrid electric. Why did hybrid electric outsell plug-in vehicles for over 20 years, over 2 decades of dominating an industry? Is because of factors like this. Our planes don't have to plug in. They power share. They can land anywhere you want them to go. And so if you're flying to an airport where there isn't going to be a plug, well, then you flip the switch, you recharge in flight, and then you land wherever you needed to go. So truly, it is plug-in optional. Now, one of our strategies is to build up the charging infrastructure in and around those airports where this market is building. And so we plan on rolling out charging infrastructure so that it's available, because of course that's the most energy optimized and environmentally friendly method. But it's done as an added feature, not as a prerequisite that would hold back adoption of the vehicles, right? And this is a very important distinction that otherwise is an immense challenge for the industry that we've overcome through our strategic approach. On your question on the things that still remain ahead that are pretty challenging for us and for the industry as a whole, these are the barnstorming days of aviation, the early days where people are still trying to figure stuff out. And that's very much true as we bring technology into commercialization. A lot of our supply chain is coming out of automotive heritage. like battery
Right.
cells
Right.
or inverters or motors. And those companies that have started in the last 8 years to do specialty aviation batteries, specialty aviation motors are relatively young too, right? So we're building an industry base that's either transitioning from one industry over into another, from automotive over into aviation. And we're bridging that gap so that they become familiar with aviation, the regulatory structures, the production quantities, the requirements that sit on that. And then we're playing, we're translating also with the aviation who doesn't know or work with traditionally with the EV system. So the regulatory structures and the people within the FAA or EASA in Europe or other regulatory bodies, we're working with them and everybody's learning along the way. How do you make a safe electrified plane? How do you prove that it's safe? How do you handle the training of maintainers? How do you answer all these questions? That is a challenge that collectively we're working through, and ultimately is one of the highest priorities for us as a company, is getting through that learning, building up that supply chain, that production base, so that ultimately we can build and support these really phenomenal products in an industry where safety is absolutely critical and can't be taken for granted.
I got a couple more questions here. One would just be around, being a CEO and becoming an entrepreneur when your journey took you there, right? But it certainly wasn't early. It wasn't a path that you thought you were going to go on. How has that journey been like being a CEO? I guess what are some advice you would give, another person perhaps, thinking about entrepreneurship, thinking about, starting something interesting that maybe they dreamed for a while and sort of they need that encouragement that you once had, talking to individuals that sort of inspired you. I guess what are some of the advice you would give to aspiring founders?
So thinking about this, I distill it down into a few core principles and a few good habits. The core principles come down to like, how do I even pick the work that I do? Like, where do I spend my time and why?
Yeah.
And this has been true for me for the last, I don't know, 20 years or so. There's three key factors that I measure things against. It's meaningful, challenging, visible. Meaningful is about, if you're going to be here, you might as well do something great. Like, do something that matters, do something that's impactful. If it's not meaningful, then really, why are you doing it? Like, again, we all have a short amount of time. Let's spend it right. Challenging, because we're all really smart in something. And if you're not challenging, that means you're not growing. You're not learning, but then you're also not maximizing the output. So like, make sure that you're always feeling challenged, always feeling a little stupid, because then you're pushing yourself just beyond where your previous limits were and you're growing. And I think that's the way to maximize the meaningful output. And then visible. So meaningful, challenging, visible. Visible is about a snowball growing as you roll down this hill of life, and you do one action, and you do something that people see, that they care about, that they're inspired by. It builds additional opportunities. So if you and that's, I think that's similarly a way to maximize the output. So meaningful, challenging, visible. If you're an entrepreneur, you're trying to decide what to do, find something that you think is absolutely what the world needs, that you have the deepest conviction, that it's not just like, oh, this could be cool, but like, in the hardest days, this is going to get me out of bed. Because those hard days are going to come. Probably the worst days are going to happen. And you need to know why you're in it. Because if you're not in it for the right reasons, it's going to be really hard or maybe impossible to get through the worst times. So meaningful, challenging, visible. The next thing is, it comes down to a whole serving of humility. It's when you are navigating through the darkness and there's no pathway for you, you don't know what's next. You have to recognize that it's a learning opportunity, that you're not going to get everything right. You have to keep your head up, and you have to, with humility, work through the path that's ahead. And part of humility for me has been realizing that I'm an orienteer, not a map maker. Now, I mentioned I grew up in Utah and do a lot of backpacking and stuff. And oftentimes it would be nice to walk around with a map and say, hey, let's go from this ridge to that ridge. But in life, we really don't have a map. I used to try to draw maps of where my life should go next. But I realized that the reality is those maps will always be wrong. And it's okay to think through what that map might look like, but it's critical to be an orienteer. And orienteering is about holding a compass, looking in a direction, deciding this is where I want to go, setting bounds for how long you're going to go in that direction, and then lifting your head up, evaluating where you are, making a change, and moving in the next direction. And this enables you to race fast, singular, focused, get things done, but then also adjust as you and the world around you changes. And so this idea of having the humility to not try to know everything, not try to know the whole path, but to be an orienteer has really served me really well. And then the last one that I'll mention here is the world is built with people, and people are amazing. And so while an individual can be phenomenal and really capable, like the richness of life is when you're surrounding yourself with just really good people who share a common mission and share common values. And that is probably the most enjoyable thing out of building a company like Ampaire, meeting people like you, Grant, and just the whole Disruptors for Good. Like it is about surrounding yourself, entrenching yourself in this ecosystem of doers, of dreamers, of people who are relentlessly and urgently pushing toward doing something great for the world. And that's, and so it makes the isolated moments of being an entrepreneur less isolating. And it makes you feel like you're part of a greater purpose and team who's here to do those positive things together. So that, from like a psychology and mental health standpoint, I think is super important as an entrepreneur.
Love it, man. Thank you. That was amazing. No, super helpful. The last question I'll end on here is, when you and Corey and sort of the team are sitting around, like thinking about the next 3 to 5 years, thinking about the goals and successes you want to achieve, I guess, what are those goals and successes? What are the topics that come up in those conversations? And what does that 3 to 5 year, goal and journey look like? What do you and the team want to achieve?
Yeah. The next 3 to 5 years is us going from it works when we're using it to it works when our customers are using it. And that is a big, important transition that you only get to do once. You don't first impressions matter. And we are in the process of bringing the world's first electrified aircraft to market. We're likely to be the first in market, and people will remember, both as it reflects upon Ampaire, but also as it reflects across the industry, will remember how we did. They will remember if it was a pain, if it had maintenance issues and was broken down on the side of the runway all the time, or they'll remember if it was a magical experience. And it's important for us over this next 3 to 5 years to make sure that we deliver a great product with a great experience that reflects well on the future of the industry, because these are the years of first impressions for us into the world, and it's really important that we do it right, that we do it with integrity, whether we do it with great technology, we do it with the humility and the connection to the customer base and all the other stakeholders who are in the ecosystem with us.
Amazing, my man. Thank you so much, Kevin, for taking the time. I know you're busy. Always grateful when founders and CEOs can take time to breathe a little bit and tell their journey, right? Tell their story, because I think this helps when you have these conversations and other people can understand what it takes, right? It's also a part of this is like education and understanding the work that needs to be put in anything that you do, anything you start, anything you build. So appreciate you taking the time. Best of luck for the next decade for you and the team.
Hey, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.